getting in a couple sets here, but what I'm going to cover is Calvin, Sunshine Shoulders, Filipino expat who provides content. Now, the reason why I'm going to cover Calvin is because Calvin consistently says that what goes on between two consenting adults is no one's business. And what he's essentially doing is he's trying to cite Supreme Court dictum. And the problem with citing Supreme Court dictum is that dictum is like ancillary. It's additional to whatever the decision was. And it can be probative. You can say, okay, it can even have meaning, but it has nothing to do with the decision itself in essence. You don't overturn dictum. Dictum isn't it isn't something for you, me, or for anyone else to base our behavior on. What the Supreme Court actually said, and they're talking about, I think the case is Wheeler, and I'll go through it all and you'll be able to see it. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's a Texas case, and it's actually a sodomy case. So I don't know if it's male on male, homosexual. I don't know if it's anal intrusion with the mechanism or any of that sort of thing. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not a strict heterosexual interaction. And that's what Calvin specializes in. It's talking about heterosexual interaction. And so what the case actually is saying is, it's just saying the same thing that is being said when you talk about search and seizure. The police come to your vehicle. They ask you if you can search your car, if they can search your car. You feel fearful. You feel that they have more authority than you have, and so therefore you consent. Okay. So your attorney comes in and tells all of the nature that they had their guns pointed at him. They had lights pointed at him. He was unarmed. He was nowhere near the vehicle. They forced him back to the vehicle at gunpoint. And then they said, we're going to search your vehicle. Okay, so what the Supreme Court really says is in every single point of the law, the most important point of the law is consent. For example, someone comes up, puts a pistol to you and says, hey, put your hands up, give me all your money. The question is did you consent? If you consented to be robbed, no problem. But what if you did not consent to be robbed? That's the issue. So consent always has to be proven. When it gets to a court, when it gets to someone that's looking at the particulars, consent must be proven. It is never implicit. Consent is never implicit. And what Calvin is attempting to say is that consent is implicit, and it's not. But I'm going to continue this, and you'll see exactly what I'm saying. Okay, let me put it this way. There's one thing when you willingly break the law. You just willingly break the law. You decide that, hey, I'm going to insider trade, and that's what I'm going to do. You willfully break the law. I'm Willie Sutton. I'm going to go over here and rob this bank, and that's what I'm going to do. You're a mafia boss. You decide that you're going to do whatever you're going to do, and that's the way you're going to do it, like Al Capone. Okay, that's one thing. But then there's the people that stumble into crime, stumble into bad events, stumble into lawsuits because they're listening to someone telling them their theory of consent and saying that, okay, you can go ahead and do this as long as there's implied consent. Implied consent is a slippery slope to incarceration, or in the case of the Philippines, it's a slippery slope to deportation. It's a slippery slope to having someone's family unalive you. So you want to know that consent is actually consent. Not just because you heard somebody say that what goes on between two consenting adults, blah, 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 blah. Consent is extremely difficult to prove. Respect it. Don't imply it. I understand that this is Calvin's tagline. And I understand that it's short. It's a short little statement. But, consent is very difficult to determine. You would hope that people abide by the law and that everything that is legal is done correctly. You would hope. I hope that I conduct myself in a legal way. I hope. But if another party makes a complaint against you, and nowadays that party can even be your wife. If another party makes a complaint against you, the complaint will be answered. So it's not cut and dry. I cannot determine that the other person consented, especially in a male and female situation. I have to be open to the idea, open to the concept that in spite of my best efforts, that I did not achieve consent. I have to be open to that. I mean, that's the only way that you can really view this. You can't act and then say, because I have acted, I achieved consent. It's better to always, in all the transaction, be doubtful as if you have achieved consent. Always be doubtful. Be doubtful. You can sign contracts, prenuptial agreements, you can have marriage contracts, you can, have witnesses that say that there was consent. You can have all of that and still run into problems with consent. So you have to take that into consideration. You have to humbly take that into consideration. The best way to look at it is Russell Brand. Now, Russell Brand is facing charges in Great Britain for something that happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. 10 or 15 years ago. Now, he, of course, feels that he achieved consent. That has to be his defense. But he's got to be open to the idea that he did not reach the level of consent. And that was 10, 15 years ago. Puff Daddy. He says that everything that occurred with the bottles of baby lotion was consensual. Okay. His accusers say it was not. And for years, he felt that he had achieved consent. So, my rule is this. When I have inordinate power over another person, and we are not equals, we are not economic equals, we are not physical equals, we are not linguistic equals, I have every expectation that consent can be an issue in such relationships. And that's the problem with age gap relationships in the Philippines and in relationships in general in the land of one and done. This man is not covering 9262. that is so broad, it's such a broad law, that I would not risk having any sexual contact with anyone in the Philippines, no matter what my relationship was to them. That statute is that broad. And he's telling you consent. He's talking about consent, and he's talking about a U.S. court case. But he's advising you on the Philippines, whereas they don't have the same concept of consent. 9262 blunts any argument that a stronger party can make to establish consent. It blunts it all. So you really, really seriously have to get a lawyer if you go to the Philippines. Once you land on that tarmac, you need one before you land on the tarmac. Consult a member of the Philippine bar. Establish what consent is in the Philippines. Don't let someone who's in Louisville, Kentucky, no matter how well-meaning he is, try and determine what consent is in the United States and in the Philippines. You just can't determine that. It's like if you come to Mexico, I am not going to try and tell you what consent is in Mexico. It is not that I have no idea what consent is in Mexico, but it's that you are going to be better off to consult a lawyer prior to any sexual transaction. That's how serious it is when you run off and try to determine consent on your own. Be very, very careful. Be very, very careful in other nations trying to take an American concept of jurisprudence and apply that all around the world, as Calvin is doing here. Listen to it.
At home, for whatever reason. And so they travel with a family. And these are consenting men and women. These are adults. Nobody's taking advantage of anybody. Y'all know how I feel about that. There are no victims in this, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, but there is one rule. It's okay to get what you want, but don't get in the way of them getting what they want. And yeah, there's men who are married, and they're traveling for sex. Certainly in America, because, we become so crazy about sex. We're conservative.
Now, see what he's saying? Now, if you let that type of language, you let that type of loose language determine your actions, even in the United States, you are making a serious, serious error. Consent is extremely difficult to establish and even more difficult to prove. Caveat emptorem coitus. Here, ChatGPT is going to rewrite my argument and is going to explain the nature of dictum. Here, listen.
Here's a clean and logically tightened version of your statement, followed by a deep dive into the difference between dictum, binding language, and rulings, especially as it relates to the Philippines and broader legal reasoning. I am willing to go anywhere for a genuine relationship with a real person, so long as that person is certifiably free from sexually transmitted infections. The challenge in the Philippines is that there is no effective regulation of sexual activity. That presents an unacceptable level of risk. That said, to its credit, The Philippines is a nation structured around one-and-done relationships. Its legal framework promotes monogamy. Philippine Penal Code 2002 and Republic Act 9262 are not optional reading. They are crucial factors. In this context, sexual activity outside of legal matrimony carries too much legal and reputational risk to be taken lightly. Once again, Cal conflates Supreme Court dictum with actual ruling. He's not entirely to blame. In a recent congressional hearing on jus soli, lawyers from both political parties made the same mistake, confusing dictum with binding judicial decision. The error was so glaring that the chairman had to clarify on record. Dictum may be probative, dictum may illustrate, but dictum is not the ruling of the court. Despite repeated and impassioned warnings, people continue to conflate dictum with binding precedent. There is a peculiarity within the Philippine legal system that ChatGPT brought to my attention. It is not my place to disclose it publicly, but those receiving YouTube income through Google ought to know what it is and be transparent about it. I leave this disclosure unnamed so that those wise enough to separate sheep from wolves may discern the difference, not by words, but by feel. Natural wool is barbed, the fur of a wolf is smooth. The sound of baba is not enough. You must learn the feel of fur and teeth. Why dictum is not ruling, a legal explanation. What is dictum? Dictum, from Latin dicere, to say, refers to statements made by a judge that are not essential to the decision. Often found in the opinion portion of a court case, these remarks may express reasoning, philosophy, or hypothetical applications, but they are non-binding. Example, a judge ruling on a contract case might mention, in criminal law, we might view this differently. That statement is dictum, not precedent. What is a ruling? A ruling is the formal judgment of a court. It applies specifically to the facts of the case. It is binding on lower courts, and in some systems forms part of the common law as precedent. Binding language versus dictum. Feature, binding language, dictum. Legal force? Yes, no. Yes, no. Can be cited as persuasive? Yes. Yes. Can be overruled or ignored by lower courts? No. Used to explain or clarify reasoning? Yes. Core to the outcome of the case? Yes, no. In the Philippines, the Philippine system is a hybrid of civil law, Spanish colonial influence, and common law, American colonial influence. This creates complexity. Courts sometimes treat dictum as influential, but
it quit. It's only going to give me so much. And a problem with the product. Okay, but you get the gist of it. And you can consult with ChatGPT if you need more information. But don't try and apply the laws of the United States internationally. Countries are different for a reason. Respect those reasons. You need a lawyer the moment you hit the tarmac in the Philippines. And probably you need a lawyer on retainer before you get to the Philippines. That's the wisest course. Just listening to some guy on YouTube saying, hey, giving you his little rule, you get yours and make sure that they get theirs. I mean, his little rule, that's bound to fail. But no matter how legally tight your argument is, there's always someone that's going to say, hey, this person didn't achieve my full consent. That happens. That's why they have courts. That's why they have lawsuits. That's why the current president of the United States owes someone $230 million or so, because he, in his mind, felt that he entered into a department store, went into a woman's changing room, and he established consent. But the woman figures that he did not establish consent. So if the person holding the highest office in the land could lose a lawsuit that said that he did not establish consent, then perhaps it is best to look at this from a different light and not as Calvin sees it.